1939, the war broke out. The Germans marched into Krakow, and that was the end of my education.
Overnight, they became our enemies. They called out the numbers, not names, but numbers.
Nobody wanted to know that we were survivors from the Holocaust. Nobody wanted to hear the story. Nobody wanted to know that we lived in a DP camp. Teachers, principals, neighbors, nobody wanted to know.
Welcome to Names Not Numbers. It's a really special program, and you are really privileged to be able to participate. Holocaust survivors are getting older, and you are the last generation that has an opportunity to learn about the Holocaust, not just from books and videos, but by talking to people who actually lived through the experience. And this is something that you will be, telling your children about. The connection that you will each be making with your survivor who you're interviewing, you can't put into words. It's about your experience, because it's not about learning it in a textbook. It's not about looking at a film. It's about developing a relationship with a very special individual who survived the Holocaust and who has an incredible amount to teach each and every one of us. I want to thank you for participating in this program, because by doing so, you are letting that voice of your Holocaust survivor live on. You're teaching those lessons to the RPRY community and to future generations.
World War II was over on May 8th, 1945. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, who later became President Eisenhower, went to visit one of the concentration camps that had just been liberated. And he wrote the following: "I made the visit deliberately in order to be in position to give first-hand evidence of these things, if ever in the future there develops a tendency to change these allegations to merely propaganda." World War II is over. They catch many of the Nazis, put them to trial. Many of them were not caught. Probably the most infamous of all of them is Adolf Eichmann. He flees to Argentina with his wife, changes his name, starts working. In 1960, the Israelis find him, kidnap him, and bring him to Israel to stand trial for what had happened to the Jewish people. The prosecutor, Gideon Hausner, decided that he was going to bring 112 survivors to tell their stories, their testimonies, and more important, the world begins to listen to them. You are the very end of this generation that can hear the testimonies from the survivors. You're asking the questions you want to ask, what you want to know, and you're making the documentary of these people. So you're listening to history, learning history, telling the history for the world to know. You are the witnesses to the witnesses.
And they see a name that I've never seen before. And they ask around in the wagon, anybody haven't heard the name Auschwitz?
This was the launch of the Names Not Numbers program, where we watched a documentary made by other students.
Today the film was a very nice perspective on his story, like what went on. I feel it's a very great opportunity, knowing that the survivors are getting older and older, that there's not going to be that many more chances to do this project.
And we talked to a journalist and learned how we should interview Holocaust survivors.
If you ask somebody if they were in the ghetto, you have to phrase the question in a way that gets them to tell you which ghetto they were in.
You shouldn't ask like a yes or no question. How you should use words like describe.
The type of questions we should be asking should be opening to even more questions.
To try to get her to elaborate and explain more.
That's what the follow-up questions are for. If you don't get place, time, description, you have to go fishing for it. Because otherwise it's a colorless story. It's not a story anymore. There are a couple of things you need to know. First of all, he got very emotional.
We should just stop, maybe nod your head a little, and like offer them tissues and a cup of water.
So he could take a break and wipe their eyes, take a deep breath and continue. Don't try to push them into talking before they're ready to talk when it comes to a moment like that. Listen, look in their eyes.
Just treat them with like respect. You have to speak loudly because like they might not be able to hear you.
Walking around the museum made everything seem much more real and also a little more sad because I got to see like in more detail what they dealt with.
We saw a boy like before the Holocaust, how he had like a durable life.
Walking around the museum, art was cool because it was cool to see how she could turn her experiences into something.
One was these spikes, and then it had like a fence over it. She was telling us about a home and what a home means to us. It kind of reminded me of like how Jews' homes were taken over and it wasn't their home anymore.
It showed me that like even after they weren't in Nazi Germany anymore, they were still under the Nazi Germany anti-Semitism.
So I saw a dress that was from the Holocaust, and I remember that because it was not like a story, it wasn't like a fairy tale, it was like actual real story showing me like what kind of clothes they had and how they like went about their daily life.
I saw these pictures of people the Nazis took of them. They were framed like mug shots and they were designed to make them look like as unattractive as possible. I was more horrified, it was disgusting kind of. Like, I mean, how they took these people and they like dehumanized them.
So they pulled out a lot of like the things they wore and the like papers, passports. They all had a Jewish star stamped on them. Seeing it made me feel like sad for them that they all like put them into this category.
One of the Jude patches that they kept on the Jews to show that they were Jewish. Like, it was sad that we were just labeled, like we were treated like animals.
It was really interesting to see like how regular their lives were and then how horrible it was because of Nazis.
You know, it really reminded me how lucky we are that we're able to live in America and that we don't have to worry about these things today.
Today, I got to learn how to use cameras much more than I did before.
My name is Adam Chinoy, and I will be your film instructor, and I will teach you how to use these cameras that we're using right now. Filming with a cell phone and filming with these cameras are very, very similar. This just happened to have a lot more buttons.
On a cell phone, you can just click the screen and it focuses.
They're not a touch screen. You can't zoom, you can't touch the camera.
But on the camera, you manually move the ring and it focuses.
Today I learned how to use the microphones.
The person that's working the audio has headphones on and they can like hear you. And there's like knobs that you can like adjust how high the status is.
As you can see, they're bouncing up and down. We want to try our hardest to keep it between -10 and -20.
During a sound check, you're supposed to turn the dial so it's in the right place so I sound good.
The microphones are really strong, so you could be like whispering, but like the person with the headphones can hear you nice and clear.
I think learning the cameras will stick with me for the rest of my life.
Soon there's not even going to be any survivors left to even do this with, so it's good to like get any last opportunities to do it with before there's no more survivors left. I want to treat them like really with respect.
I never met a survivor before, and I am really excited, really nervous, but at the same time I feel very like grateful because I have the opportunity to meet somebody like that.
A lot of people
don't know about the Holocaust, and they're misinformed, and they're the proof that it happened. I feel very honored to be able to do it.
I'm nervous because I've never interviewed a survivor before, and I just hope everything goes well, but I'm also excited. I think it'll be really inspirational.
Today I'm going to interview Arthur Spielman, and I'm very excited to meet a Holocaust survivor and interview them. The more people who know the stories of survivors, the better it is, so that future generations can know about what these survivors went through to survive.
This is a unique opportunity that not many people get to have, and not many people in the future will have.
Today I'm going to be meeting a survivor for the first time, and I feel excited because I'm excited to learn about their story. Yeah, I'm excited to get to meet them and know them.
Today I'm going to interview Lola Klein, and my heart is racing and I'm very nervous.
I'm scared I might laugh during it because I might be really nervous, or I might cry because it might be really sad to me.
Today I'm going to be interviewing my grandmother. I feel a little nervous, but also excited to hear her answers and her story because she never really shared it with me in detail.
I'm excited for the whole experience to get to interview a survivor and hear their story. And I'm kind of nervous to be up there asking questions and doing all the cameras.
Today I'm going to be interviewing my great-grandmother Rachel Lefkowitz. I'm very excited because I never really heard her full story before.
Their story is not just about the numbers that were on their arms. They have a story and they're each individual. The question I wanted to ask the most is, what can you pass on to his generation?
How was he able to keep going?
How did they rebuild their life after the Holocaust?
Names Not Numbers, Mrs. Evelyn Kornick, RPRY, take 1.
My name is Evelyn Kornick. I was born in Berlin, Germany in 1935. And in Germany, I came from a wealthy family. My mother was from Berlin. My father was from a small town called Berkach. My father was one of 13 children. My mother's family had 3 girls. My mother was the youngest. My father was a furrier. He had a fur concession and a fancy department store in Berlin. And my mother, she helped my father in the business. My mother was fluent in 3 languages, German, English, and French, and my father only knew German.
My name is Claire Bohr. I was born in the town of Mizuch, Poland, 1938. The population was about 2,000 people, and I lived in a house with my mother and father. And it was a 2-family house, and the other part of the house was an aunt and an uncle and their 2 children. And in front on the same property was another house where my grandmother lived, my father's 2 youngest brothers who were still bachelors, so they lived there with my grandmother. My father was in the tanning business, and that is that the farmers would bring him the hides of animals and he would turn it into leather. My grandmother would bake a lot of challahs on Friday night, and any poor person that wanted to have a challah would come to her door and she would give out the challahs.
My name is Zelda Polowski. I was born in Droysk, a small shtetl near Vilna, in 1932. My mother's name was Rochel Tsipuk, and my father's name was Michal Tsipuk. My father had a store in our house, and he had a tannery. My sibling was Sarah. We had 2 synagogues, Hasidische Shul and the Misnagdische Shul. We belonged to the Hasidische Shul. Chali was always baked by my mother. The whole town was Shabbos. And we had an oven that was in the kitchen. The chont was in our house. It was a hut, and that also gave us warmth. I remember we had a lot of fish. The town had a lake, so there was a lot of fish.
My name is Lola, or Lodzia, that's my Polish name. Jęczolski, that's my father's last name. Belski, which is my mother's last name. Seltzer, because we were forced to change our last name when we came to this country as immigrants.
and my married name is Klein. I was born in Novogrudek, Poland, it's now Belarus. February of '41, I was born on a farm, my father's farm. It was a mill. Novogrudek was a pretty large city, and there was 6,000 Jews that lived in Novogrudek or the surrounding area. My mother was born Tai Bibelski. My father was born Abraham Jancholski. My parents were peasants, which doesn't mean anything, except that they lived on farms. Novogrudek itself, my uncles, my family were very friendly with non-Jews that lived next door to them. And I don't think they had a problem with anti-Semitism.
My name is Rachel Lefkowitz, Czechoslovakia, Dolha, May 17, 1927. My father was a glazier. We were poor, but very happy. We were a very close family. We were 6. My sister was Golda Mariam. My brother was David, then Schleiman, and then Moshe Luther, and Wolf. He was the youngest one. We were a happy family.
Can you describe Shabbos and Yom Tovim in your home before the war?
It was great. My father, my brothers, all went to shul. We had a Friday night dinner. My mother lit candles. My father was a joker. He said, those mirrors, no dessert. I only went, they called it hiton, which was once a week, one after school. That's all I had. We didn't have any toys. My father made some toys. I had one doll that I made out of rags, and I took such good care of that doll, like it would have been alive.
My name is Arthur Spielman. I was born in the city of Krakow in 1928. A third of Krakow was Jewish. There was a neighborhood called Kazimierz where it was all Jewish. There were a lot of synagogues, Bota Midrashim, yeshivas. The first girls' school, Bais Yankov, was formed in the city of Krakow. My mother was one of the first students. My family was an Orthodox family, mostly Hasidic. My grandfather lived in the same building with us. He was in the fish business, also in importing food business, exotic foods from out of the country. My father was in the shoe business. He was making shoe uppers, not the bottom of the shoes, but the top of the shoes, the leather, designing. My mother was a homemaker. I had 2 sisters. My mother's father, I used to go to shul with him, not with my father, because he used to go to a Hasidic shtibel and it was more fun going there. I went to Cheder, to a melamed. When I started when I was 3 years old. When I was 5 years old, that was the custom those days. You used to have a Chumash Seder. When you start learning Chumash, you had like a party. I also went to Polish school. I went up to the 2nd grade. I wasn't able to go to the 3rd. They wouldn't pass me for some reason. I don't know why. So my father decided to take me out of the Polish school altogether and send me to Yeshiva Torah, which was a school where it taught everything. But I only went to the 4th grade. After the 4th grade, which was 1939, the war broke out and the Germans marched into Krakow. And that was the end of my education.
Were you told anything about the night of Kristallnacht?
Yes, my mother said that we lived in an apartment building. They were burning the Jewish stores owned by Jews and the synagogues. And she carried me out and we watched them burn on the terrace.
There were all kinds of rumors before the Germans came and during the time that they occupied Novogrudek. The men were concerned, so they were the first ones to go into the woods. The first group had maybe 20, 25 people in it. They knew all the trails and they knew how to take care of themselves. After the first mass killing in August, September of 1941, that's when the Jews realized what was going to happen in that area. That's where many more ran into the woods to hide. Now, I was 6 months old, and it was during the summer in August. They took me into the forest. By September, October, things were getting pretty cold. I started getting sick. It was hard to keep a baby comfortable enough in the forest. And so they had to find a family to take care of me. And that's why I left the forest. The couple I was placed with, they didn't have any children. Placing me with them, they probably thought that my parents would never survive the war and they'd have a child, and I was a baby. So it was a great time to accept me as their own. I think this couple, I am not sure, worked for my father's family. They had a farm, it was a mill, it was a successful mill, and the arrangement was this. Around October, November, I was placed under this one particular window. My mother was not allowed to come with me because my uncles and my father was afraid that she might cause a scene. My father took me, they placed me under the window, and they waited until somebody came out from that house to pick me up, the couple that they had arranged to come and get me. I had a chain with a cross around my neck. I was wrapped in a blanket, and pinned to my blanket was a note, and this was not unusual, that I was a Christian child, that I was with a family that was too poor to take care of me, and anybody that found me, would they have pity on me and please take care of me. The arrangement was that they would take me to the local police station to report that they found a baby. They took me into the captain and they said, I want you to know we just found this baby, and they explained how they found me. We want to keep her, we don't have any children. I was told he picked me up and he had a cigar in his hand or something, and I started playing with the cigar and smiling at him and cooing, and he said, you know, I'd like to take her home because I was a baby. All babies are adorable, right? The couple, of course, wanted to keep me, and he said, yes, it's okay. I was raised as a Catholic. I went to church religiously, and I was taught to hate the Jews. That was for my benefit and for that couple's, the family's benefit. They had to teach me to hate Jews, and they had to behave as if they hate Jews, otherwise we all would have been murdered.
They let us stay in our homes, the Germans that came in, and they would ask us to give a certain amount of coats, a certain amount of money, and the kihila, because they knew who was rich and who was poor in town, and that's what we had to deliver. They told us that they are going to take us to Vilna ghetto. So my father decided Vilna was quite far from us. We were afraid that we would not be able to come back to the villages that my father knew from work. So we smuggled ourselves in the Breslova ghetto because we had cousins there. As an 8-year-old coming into Breslova ghetto, and they had electricity. And that was the first time that you go to the bathroom in the house. There was no such thing in my town. So I, as a child, didn't feel any bad things in the ghetto. But we started hearing what was happening to the other ghettos. So my father and some other men decided to have a hiding place. We didn't know what their intentions were, because they kept on telling us that as long as we work, we'll live in the ghetto. But things changed. Our ghetto, it had a lake all around it. I came out and to the lake, and I saw there were people with guns. They were not supposed to be there. It was never there, because we played by the water. At 8 years old, you know that there is danger. So I went to get my mother, and she looked, and sure enough, they started shooting from the outside of the ghetto going towards inside. But we heard it, but it didn't come to us yet. That's when we went into the hiding place. As we were running, people saw that we probably are running, that we have a hiding place. We got into the hiding place, many more people than there was room for. My father opened that stone and got in, because he was our leader. And without him, we wouldn't have survived.
For me, everything changed when the Germans came into the town in '42. One of the first things they did was that 2 German soldiers were coming by, and they took my dog away. And then we were put in the ghetto. Another memory I have of that time was that I was standing by the door that had like a window in it, and I was looking out, and I witnessed the Germans. There was a hanging, and the man had a big placard on the front of his chest. When the war impacted on me, I was 4 years old. We were now many families living in one house. And so if my mother wasn't feeling well, there was no place for me to play. There was one room that my mother, father, and I lived in. So if she was sleeping, I couldn't walk around, I couldn't go outside. It wasn't safe to go outside or play. We left the ghetto in the fall of '42. We had heard from other people coming from other towns that had been liquidated, that it was very dangerous, that the Jews were being killed. So my father arranged for this man to take our family into hiding. This man came one day, and he told us we had to leave that day. My father wasn't ready. Maybe he needed to take care of the rest of the family, but this man insisted that we had to leave. So my mother and I left with this man. And when we left with him to go into hiding, the next day was the roundup in our town. There were groups of Germans that would go from these small towns, from town to town. They took all the Jews out of the ghetto, and they brought them to an area, and they had them dig like a big grave, and they killed everyone.
Why didn't your father hide with you?
He had every intention of following us, but the very next day was the roundup. I later learned that he was not caught in the original roundup. He was hiding, and then a few days later, someone betrayed him, and he was killed. My last memory is when we left. My father said he couldn't join us, and my father picked me up and he kissed me goodbye. We were in a field of some sort, and that was the last time I saw him.
In 1939, I was not quite 11 years old. When the war started, my father ran away, with most of the Jewish men ran away. They were running east towards Russia, hoping to avoid being captured by the Germans. But the Germans were quicker than they were, and they caught on to them. Thank God my father came back. If he hadn't come back, I wouldn't be here today. One thing is, my father was born in Slovakia, not in Poland. With that, they recognized us as foreign subjects. We had privileges. We didn't have to wear the armband. We also didn't have to go to the ghetto. In 1941, the Jews of Krakow were forced to go into the ghetto. Most of my family, they all went to the ghetto. We went with them because we didn't want to be the only Jews living in Krakow among the Goyim. But in 1942, when the big actions came, when they took away my grandparents, so my father, being a foreign subject, was able to move out of the ghetto. We moved into a small town outside Krakow, and we walked to the ghetto every day because he had a shop in the ghetto. And this lasted another few months, then they liquidated the ghetto completely. As we lived as foreign subjects right outside Krakow, my father had contacts that told him, you're not going to be able to continue the way you live now because you're a Jew. So we had to disappear. One day, my father told me, tonight you have to leave. You're going to go with smugglers to Slovakia or eventually to Hungary. But this was like a dream. I never thought I'm going to see my parents again. Late in the evening, when it was dark, and there they gave us signals how we're going to meet the rest of the people, the smugglers. The signal was, in the woods, it's very noisy, and you can follow the signal. And that's how we met. It took about 3 days. Smugglers disappeared, and we didn't know where we were. Some of the group wanted to go back home. They started to panic. I insisted, I'm not going home. I'm going forward. I had a sense of direction, follow the mountains, whatever. But it didn't take very long before we were surrounded by Slovakian gendarmes. They happened to be very nice. They were civil. The first thing they took us to the mother's house to be fed because we were starved. After that, they took us to a jail in town of Trstina, Slovakia.
The story that I got, there was a German admiral who was the head of the German Navy, even had a ship named after him. His daughter was the one who helped get us out. Supposedly we had a furnished room in a family from Russia. We were on the Siberian Railroad that took us to the end point, and then I guess took a boat to Yokohama. The one thing I remember about the train, which was interesting, I would look out the window and I only saw houses. The whole time I only saw houses right next to the railroad tracks. And then I said, are there any houses beyond that? Because evidently it was very desolate where we were traveling through in Russia. And as I say, then we landed at the end of Russia and then took a ship to Japan.
Describe the day the Germans came into your town.
I remember them marching in, and we even went to meet them. We didn't know who we are meeting. At the beginning, we didn't have too many reasons to be afraid of. It was on a Shabbos. I was home with my mother. They said, leave everything. My father and my brothers were in shul. They took them from shul and took us to the train station. We were put into cattle cars. There was nothing in there, no food, no water. We were packed like animals. There was crying and screaming children and old people. Then when the train finally stopped and the doors opened from the train, and all of a sudden I see there a German with a dog next to him, and there was a gate that Arbeit macht frei. Mengele was selecting who should go to the right and who should go to the left. Kept on saying, schnell, schnell, which means fast, fast, get off. I had a brother that was 2 years younger than me. It was next to me, it was walking with me together. And they said already, they showed my mother already to go to the left. And he was with me, but my mother called him over. He should go with her, not knowing where she was going. And that was going to the crematorium. They told us, you will see your parents once a week on Sunday. When I heard that, I said, how could I live for a whole week to be without my mother? And we were marching, they had us marching to the barracks. As soon as we got in there, the SS woman said, do you see that smoke? That is your family's smoke. We were not human. How could that be? What's happening to us? Why and what did we do?
My mother told me the story that there were two farms. One was sort of well-to-do looking and the other one was a poor-looking farm. She decided to take a chance and knocked on the door of this poor-looking farm. Now, these people were not paid, they didn't know us or anything, but they took us in. And what they did is they dug a hole in the barn under a pig, and we were in this hole, and there were boards on top and hay. So my mother and I were in this hole underneath the pig, and it was total darkness in there, and that's where we stayed. The hole was just big enough to hold the two of us. Being in the hole was really the worst part of the whole period that I was in hiding, because it was just my mother and I. So at the beginning, my mother would tell me stories, books she had read, or movies she had seen. After a while, because it was so dark, there was no differentiation between night and day. So when she was sleeping, I was awake. So I was all by myself. I, had no one to talk to, no one to play with. So I sort of started creating a fantasy world. It got to the point where I think I lost touch with reality. So when at night we would come out to eat, to use the bathroom, whatever, and the people who were hiding us, they were very simple people, very superstitious. And they told my mother that they thought I was possessed by the devil. So my mother decided that we had to leave, and that's what we did. And we went into a village where she knew someone who had worked for our family. And so I was running around and being with other children. I came back to being myself. When I think about that period, there were two things. I was always cold, I was always hungry, and I could never speak.
Once we were caught, the gendarmes took us to jail. Some Slovakian Jews from Liptovský Svatý Mikuláš came and took us out of the jail and took us to the home. We stayed in Liptovský Svatý Mikuláš for Rosh Hashanah, and from there we continued down to the Hungarian border. We had to get smuggled across the Hungarian border. The following morning, the smugglers took us into a shul, but nobody wanted to bother with us. We were claiming we're not Jews. They told us to go to the police, go register in the police. Well, we had no choice, that's what we did. From the police, they put us in an orphanage. They only spoke Hungarian, we didn't speak Hungarian. And the only people we could communicate with was with the elders. I was in the orphanage for about 7 or 8 months. 2 weeks after I was in the orphanage, my sister, my older sister, also followed the same direction. My parents followed later, and they came, and we were notified they were staying in the family's house in Košice in Hungary. So we went there to see them. We just met them for a brief moment, and they continued out to Budapest, where they acquired Christian papers. They got papers as Polish Catholics. 7 months later, my father sent someone to get me out of there. When I got to Budapest, I had to go to the same thing. I went to the Polish ministerium and claimed I'm a Roman Catholic, and I also got Christian papers. In the meantime came April 1944, when the Germans marched into Hungary, and they occupied Hungary. We didn't stay much longer in Budapest. We moved to a town called Miskolc, which was away from Budapest, we didn't want to be seen much. So when we got to Miskolc, we had contacts with some Jews there. We got an apartment, and we lived as Roman Catholics, as Polish Roman Catholics. We had neighbors who were Hungarian Nazis. We got very friendly with them, but they didn't know we were Jewish. My father got a job in the shoe business. While we lived as Goyim, we haven't eaten treif, and my mother used to buy non-kosher meat just for the neighbors not to suspect us that we're Jews. My mother also bought a cross and put it on a wall so the people wouldn't suspect us that we're Jews. My father took chances. There were people like us that we kept contact with, and we davened in the house.
I had fabulous foster parents. They took good care of me. I don't ever remember being hungry. They protected me from the Nazis. I loved them very much.
Were you ever scared?
I was scared a lot. I was scared when the planes came over. I knew why they were coming over. They were going to drop bombs. I was scared when the Germans came through that house looking for Jews. I didn't know what they would do to us. I remember one bombing. When I went to my foster parents, I was in a crib. After a while, I got too big for the crib, so I had a small bed. They kept the crib, and they put straw in the crib. I guess they figured it was a good protection from bullets. Several occasions when there were bombings and when the Germans were coming through, that they would grab me and put me between them and put their arms around my back, and we would lie flat on the ground in front of the crib. And if the bullets came through the window, they would pass right over us. They had their arms around me so that they would protect me from any bullets coming through.
How were you reunited with your family?
My parents did not get to see me very much during the war. They knew where I was, and but they didn't know who I was, what I looked like. And naturally, my parents wanted to get me back from the couple where they had left me. The couple wouldn't give me back. They were shocked that my parents survived, that all these Jews had survived. They considered me their baby. They had me for 3 or 4 years, and they were pretty much attached to me. And of course, they were my parents. I had no other parents. And they refused to give me back. So the plan was to kidnap me. They arranged for my foster father to be called into the military. My foster mother went to visit him to bring him some food. She left me at home, and she left me with one of her neighbors to sort of watch over me. She didn't expect anything to happen. I mean, it was a pretty safe area for children. And they showed up that day. I was playing outside. I was sitting in a circle in front of the building with other children from the building, and we were playing some game. I see these three strangers come into the yard. Then they came up to the circle. They wanted to know who was Lodger here. I sat very quietly. I wasn't going to say I'm Lodger. I mean, this girl stood up and she pointed at me and she said, she's Lodger. So they came over to talk to me. They offered me a bag of candy if I would show them the road to Novogrudek. Now this was a war. I mean, who has a bag of candy? And you know how children like candy. So with encouragement, all I had to do was take them down the road and show them the turn. Climbed into the wagon, I showed them where the road was, and then I wanted to get out. And of course they didn't let me out. They took me into Novogrudek. They had an apartment there. You know I was hysterical, screaming, crying the entire time. And I called them all kinds of names. You dirty Jews, what do you want? Let go of me. And I would beat on their chests and carry on. And I was a little kid. They won out. I lived with them in that apartment until we left to go to Germany, to the DP camp. There must have been some kind of an agreement between my mother and my foster mother, because on several occasions my mother allowed her to come and stay with me and sleep with me. She would sleep the night with me. And those are the few occasions that I remember that I was a little happier.
In concentration camp, they used to serve soup with little pieces of pig fat they had. I used to take that out. As hungry as I was, I used to give it away. I could not swallow it. They put us into barracks. We had beds with no blankets. They gave us a dress, no underwear. They shaved everybody everywhere. After work, marching back to the barracks. Every night there were sirens. We just walked in, there were sirens going on. This one night, the sirens came very, very loud, very close. A gate opened up. People started running out. That was into the woods. They found all these people, dead people from the 2000, the people that they picked to rebuild that factory. We were left 200 that one night.
They came in the morning and they surrounded our hiding place, and they said, if you don't come out, they'll kill us. But since they surrounded the hiding place, or the whole building, we came out, and I remember my sister holding onto my mother's leg. We figured that'll be it. And she was crying so hysterically. And they took them. There must have been about 60 people in the building that they took us to. And my father was only looking to get out. He must have paid off a guard that was watching that we shouldn't escape. So the 60 people wanted to come with us. But my father, we didn't have a chance. But he took 10 people. So very early in the morning, we started running away from the ghetto. So we ran into a barn. We lay down there to wait till it becomes nighttime. And as soon as nighttime came, we started running again. All of a sudden, my mother realized that I was with her. But Sarah, my sister, she fell asleep, and my father went. He got a hold of my sister and schlepped her. We were able to get to the farmer that my father arranged. When we came to the farm, to Banetke, he said, 10 people? Where am I going to hide 10 people? And then he found a hiding place in the barn where he had the animals. We crawled into the hiding place that he built, and then he put grass on top of it. My father was at night, he would go out and find food for us from the gardens. In the morning, we heard the straw that my father is coming in, and I'll never forget it. She said, Michale, du bist da, you are here, now I can die. She held herself back from dying because she had 2 children. And she kept on telling me and my sister that if we survive, we'll take care of each other. And that's why I always heard her telling us to take care of each other, and we did.
Can you describe any memories of your time in Yokohama?
What I do remember is at that time, I think we were like the first, group of Europeans that came to Japan en masse. And I don't think they had seen many Europeans. And I remember always running behind my mother's skirts because the people would stop and stare at us. And it scared me. That made a big impression on me because I don't remember too much else of Japan.
How was your family treated in Japan?
As I say, I was only 5, so I don't really know, but I think they were treated well.
What was it like to always be moving from place to place?
I guess it really didn't bother me that much. I don't know. When you're young and you have your parents with you, you don't worry.
Do you remember about the trip to America?
This was a funny story. This I do remember. Because my mother told me about this. This was everybody on the ship, but we didn't know if there were other Jews. That I don't know. They had the life-saving ring, and they wanted me to sit in the middle because they thought I was cute. And I said to my mommy, I'm afraid I don't want to do that. So I got out of the ring, and there's a picture of me. I look like an orangutan with my arm so long stretched out to hold my mother's hand because I didn't want to be in the picture in the first place. What I heard was that this was turned into a military ship and then was bombed in the Second World War. And because we were coming from the Orient, we landed in California. Most of the refugees came in New York, but we came in California. So we took a train and wound up in New York.
My mother knew that my father had buried some jewelry and money in her backyard in the house. So she put me into like a shed and covered me up. And she decided to go back to the house, to the garden, and to dig up the money. And she could pay someone to help to keep us. It was very frightening for me because she left me alone in this dark shed. There was no light. I don't know how long she was gone, but being in the dark and frightened like that, it just seemed forever. And I actually remember thinking, what will happen to me if she doesn't come back, if she gets caught? But she did come back. She was able to pay somebody to hide us, and this family put us in an attic, so it wasn't dark like the hole. We were protected from the elements, unlike when we were in the woods. We were there in the attic, and then the Russians liberated that area. So they liberated that area in like the beginning of 44. I know my mother and I couldn't believe that we were safe. I was afraid to leave the hiding place. And we came out, and I remember the Russian soldiers were being very nice. The war was still going on, but that part was, the Germans were no longer in that area.
The front was coming closer. The Russian army went through the Carpathian Mountains and got closer, and we had to hide in a wine cellar. Miskolc was known for wine country. They had like deep cellars where they were storing wine with huge barrels. And we stayed the last 3 weeks while the front was moving back and forth. We stayed in the wine cellars. We were liberated December the 3rd, 1944 by the Russian army. From the cellar, we walked out to the front, and we saw a Russian patrol, 2 women and a guy. The first patrol that walked into that area where we were. And a while later, a swarm of soldiers on horses and wagons and trucks, old men, young men. The Russian army was everything. And then we went back, we stayed in Miskolc maybe a month or 2, and then we moved back to Budapest.
So how long did it take you to feel comfortable being with your biological parents again?
I never felt comfortable with them. I always imagined that I was actually kidnapped and that I belonged somewhere else. And even when we were in Germany, I still thought about my foster parents. If everybody is telling me this is where I belong, that I'm Jewish, these are my parents, I finally started to accept that. But it took me a very long time to accept it. We were in Germany. There was a lot of anti-Semitism in Germany. The camp was surrounded by a fence that nobody could climb. It was that high up. And on top of that, there was barbed wire. And there were only 2 entrances where you can go in and out of the DP camp. And these were the little houses, and they were in terrible condition because nobody had lived in them, God knows how long. There were many families living in each one of these houses with 1 toilet and a couple of sinks to the side. It was a perfect place to put Jews and to keep them in an area, because if you didn't live in a protected area and you were Jewish, you could still get murdered.
See, we were liberated the beginning of 44. I remember, see, Russian has a melodious sound. When I heard them speaking, I knew we were liberated. But we did not go home at that point. We stayed with the Russian army, and they gave us some food, and we stayed with them because we knew it's not safe to go back to a town where we came from.
What was the first thing you did after liberation?
When we came to our house was taken apart because there was, they thought maybe we hid goods like diamonds, but we had it on ourselves. So they said, get lost, and we sure left.
Describe the forced death march.
We were walking for 7 weeks. The war, it was getting closer to be over. We were walking all day. At night, we sometimes slept in the woods. We had no food, no nothing. Somebody bent down to drink. There was a little puddle of water from the rain. Anything for any little thing. They just shot you right away and just kicked you into the gutter. The sirens were coming very loud, very close. We walked and walked. I had those wooden shoes. My feet were hurting very bad. I told my friends I can't walk anymore. They tried, they took everything, every little I had to carry, they took from me, they carried for me. And they didn't want to let me go. The morning came and it's quiet. All of a sudden, all the Germans left. We started hearing, "You're free, we are free. The war is over, the war is over."
Let me ask you a question. Was there Purim observed in Europe during the Shoah? That one night we recall the old saying, Misha nichnas adar marbim besimcha. We decided to arrange a secret celebration of Purim as the law requires. This is in Buchenwald. Pesach, Sukkot, Rosh Hashanah, Hanukkah. You've heard stories. They somehow find a little oil and they light it, a Hanukkah candle, and they blow it out before they're discovered. Somehow, Jewish life continued during the Shoah, which is really amazing. These are spiritual heroes. They kept kosher to the best of their abilities. They kept Shabbos to the best of their abilities. We have to ask ourselves when hearing these stories, do we have the strength to act like this nowadays? How does that happen? How does someone go through this horrible experience and not lose touch with the world? They don't define themselves by what happened to me. I'm defined by what I do for other people. They also tend to view the Shoah not as God's fault, but as man's fault. Hashem created the world and gave every single person free will, the ability to choose for themselves good or evil. Some other survivors decided that they're not going to try to understand the Shoah because it can't be understood. It can't be fathomed. Even great rabbis who initially thought, oh, we could explain why this had to happen, they realized we can't explain it. Not everything that happens in the world is explainable by us. We're limited. We're just human beings. We're just going to move forward. If we don't move forward, then Hitler is victorious. But it must be said, not every person kept their emunah, kept their faith in the Shoah. It's not for us to judge. None of us in this room have ever been through what they've been through. More often than not, after a couple of years, survivors regained their faith. So some lost faith, most did not, and even those who lost faith somehow managed to recover it. They understood that because they survived, that gave them an extra mission in life. We're going to keep on building, we're going to keep on growing. And remember that all of the survivors that you interviewed are just examples of how to choose good over evil, how to choose life over death, how to choose kindness over cruelty, and to learn from them that your attitude always counts. And that will help you through every situation throughout life.
I feel like I have a big responsibility because after us there won't be anybody else with this chance that we have.
It was a really amazing experience. It was really special, and I wish we could do it again.
I feel honored that I get to do it, and I just feel like I'm so lucky that I got to meet her and hear her story.
It was really inspirational that they've been through so much and now they come here and share their story and they have like a good life now and that they can really live after what happened to them.
I'm not really sure how I expected a survivor to really be like, because obviously they've been through some difficult things, so like that could really impact like the person they are. Might like make them a little more like strict or like proper, like something like that.
It surprised me how strong she was, yet how like she like told us like she almost did lose faith and she like was like going crazy, but she was still like strong. During the interview, I was very, very emotional because It was just very hard hearing about her experience because I loved hearing about it. It was a very good teaching moment, but it's still so sad what happened to her and how she like coped with it all and she couldn't really do anything about it. And also she reminded me of my great-grandmother because she's so sweet and that made me really sad.
She called me after and she was like very glad that she did it because she was nervous. She was very nervous in the beginning and she called me and she was like, I'm really happy I did this. It helped me a lot. I feel like I have a better connection with my grandmother now.
To make the best out of life that you can, you know, pick a career that you would like to be in, be nice to people, be honest.
There's absolutely a reason to do this again. You have to keep talking about it. You can't just let it be something of the past. You have to keep talking about it and bring it up and do these types of names and numbers while you still can, while there are still survivors. You have to make sure you record as much of this as you possibly can so that nobody will ever forget.
I never met a survivor. My first time, I was nervous and I liked the whole story. Now I met her, she was nice.
First, that to remember the Holocaust, to remember all the people that we lost. And then, in the second is to keep Israel safe, because there's always a place to go to in case we are in Ukraine. And be a mensch at all situations.
Sitting in front of the survivor and being able to ask anything I wanted felt empowering in a way. I know that there's so much that he has to say, that he's able to say, and here I am able to kind of unlock it. And I feel like that's all this is really about, and that's the biggest point of this, being able to A, make a connection with the survivor, and B, then being from that connection, being able to transmit it to the next generation.
You have life in front of you. The future can be great. You just have to go out and get it.
It feels like we're a lot closer because I never understood like really what she's gone through to actually get here. So now I'm a lot more grateful that I'm here because if it wasn't for her surviving all of those horrendous occasions, I wouldn't be here right now.
The best message is you should be good and honest. Be nice to everyone. Just don't let anyone step on you and tell you that you are not good.
Now that I've met one, I feel good because we helped them say their stories, so that was very nice.
Judaism for me is based on justice, and I think every one of you should really work towards justice, towards to make sure that nobody picks on anybody else, nobody calls anybody else names. If you see somebody doing something bad, don't be, like they say, don't stand by. Standing by is almost as bad as doing evil.
I think we as a school and me as a person got to experience something that not many people got to experience. We're very lucky, but also have to remember the point isn't so we can get the experience. It's the point is so they can get the experience of sharing their story, because everyone deserves to have their story told.
Everybody that's born in this world has something to contribute. People from other countries, they have colorful, colorful traditions. But if you don't learn to appreciate it, neither will your children. So look at the legacy that hatred leaves to the generations after them. So be careful. Absorb what you can from other cultures, from people that come from other worlds than yours, and appreciate what they have to offer to your life.
I think it's called Names Not Numbers because we're not supposed to judge people by anything, like any of their characteristics. It doesn't matter what their appearance is
or what's on their appearances, but it matters what's inside of them and their story. So I think that that's why it's called Names Not Numbers.
If I could define a survivor in one word, I would say they're humble.
Courageous.
Powerful.
Brave.
A hero.
Inspirational.
Strong.
Wise.
Determined.
Resilient.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for telling us your story. Thank you for being comfortable telling it to us.
We're very appreciative that you are able to talk to us so we can carry on your legacy.
I'm so grateful, and I hope that I could get a chance to speak with you and other survivors in my lifetime.
It's an honor to have you, to be able to interview.
I want to thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.